before the first call to prayer echoed across the restless streets of Lagos, before buses roared to life and traders shouted prices into the dawn, Mama Chama was already awake, tying her faded wrapper, lifting her empty baskets, and stepping into the cool darkness with quiet determination. Because for her, sleep was a luxury she could not afford. Every morning at exactly 4 o'clock, she rose from the thin mat on the floor of their single-room apartment, washed her face with cold water, and prepared a simple meal for her daughter, Chama, whose future was the only dream Mama Chama allowed herself to carry. By sunrise, she was seated on her familiar wooden stool in Balagon Market, surrounded by piles of tomatoes, onions, and peppers, her hands rough and scarred from years of cutting, lifting, and sorting, her back permanently bent from carrying heavy baskets on her head through crowded streets. Yet her face remained calm and patient, because complaining had never fed a child. Customers passed by without noticing her pain, some bargaining harshly, others mocking her torn sandals. But Mama Chama endured it all in silence, reminding herself that every coin she earned brought her daughter one step closer to a life far beyond the market dust. Chama was not like other children. From a young age, her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and books fascinated her more than toys. So while other girls played outside after school, she hurried home to read, often under weak candlelight when electricity disappeared for days. And on those nights, Mama Chama would buy candles instead of food, choosing darkness in her own stomach so light could exist in her child's mind. There were days when hunger visited their home like an unwanted guest, and Mama Chama would smile gently and say, "I already ate at the market," even though her stomach burned with emptiness, lying not out of cruelty but love, because a mother's heart does not count sacrifice as loss. Chama noticed everything: the way her mother's hands shook from exhaustion, the way neighbors whispered and laughed, calling her just a poor tomato seller, the way her mother still straightened her back with pride every time Chama brought home good grades. And slowly, silently, a promise grew inside her young heart, a promise to turn all that suffering into something meaningful. Years passed like pages turning too fast, and Mama Chama's hair grayed while her body weakened. But her spirit never broke, because each school term Chama returned with awards, first positions, and teachers' praise, confirming that every sleepless night and skipped meal had purpose. Even when rain flooded the market and sickness threatened her strength, Mama Chama dragged herself back to her stool, whispering prayers under her breath, believing education was the only inheritance she could give. In that crowded, noisy market, among baskets of vegetables and the smell of earth and sweat, Mama Chama was not just selling food, she was selling hope. Piece by piece, day by day, trading her comfort for her daughter's destiny, unaware that this very sacrifice would one day become the truth her daughter would struggle to face. By the time Chama turned 18, the seed her mother planted through years of sweat and silent suffering had begun to bloom, because the little girl who once studied beside flickering candles had grown into a young woman whose name was spoken with admiration in classrooms and school halls, her brilliance earning scholarships that lifted her beyond the limitations of their poor neighborhood. Yet Mama Chama never allowed herself to feel pride before duty, continuing to wake before dawn, sell vegetables until her legs trembled, and return home exhausted but smiling, knowing her labor was slowly pushing her daughter toward a future neither of them had ever touched. Chama carried her mother's sacrifices like a hidden fire inside her chest, studying harder than anyone else, refusing distraction, enduring loneliness while others enjoyed youth, because failure felt like betrayal to the woman who skipped meals so she could eat. And when Chama finally gained admission into medical school, Mama Chama fell to her knees on the dusty floor, tears soaking the ground as she thanked God for turning suffering into testimony. Medical school was brutal, filled with sleepless nights, endless textbooks, and moments when Chama nearly collapsed from pressure. But whenever doubt crept in, she remembered her mother's cracked hands counting coins at 4 in the morning, and that memory forced her back to her feet. Mama Chama sold even more in the market, sometimes borrowing money to cover fees, sometimes enduring insults from traders who mocked her ambition for a daughter too big for her class. Yet she accepted every humiliation gladly, believing education could lift an entire generation. Years later, when Chama graduated and became Dr. Chama Okafor, the celebration was small but powerful, held in their cramped apartment with neighbors who clapped and cried, while Mama Chama stood in the corner, trembling with joy, staring at her daughter as if she were a miracle she once carried on her back through crowded streets. Lagos soon embraced Dr. Chama as private hospitals competed for her skills, and success arrived faster than either of them imagined, bringing money, respect, and a new lifestyle that slowly pulled Chama away from the world she came from. She moved into a beautiful house in Lekki, drove expensive cars, wore elegant clothes, and walked among people who spoke polished English and came from families of influence, while Mama Chama remained behind in a modest home, grateful but quietly feeling the widening distance between them. At first, Chama visited often, proud to spoil her mother, but as her world expanded, something uncomfortable began to grow inside her anons whenever colleagues asked about her background, a tightness in her chest when wealthy friends spoke of elite schools and powerful parents. And without fully admitting it, shame quietly entered her heart. When Chama met Ika, a man born into wealth and privilege, his refined world magnified her fear. Because his parents owned oil companies, his family moved among politicians, and suddenly the image of a market woman mother felt like a shadow she did not know how to explain. So Chama began to lie, softly at first, telling people her mother was a retired teacher, then avoiding visits, replacing presents with money, believing she was protecting her success rather than betraying her roots. Mama Chama sensed the shift, the shorter phone calls, the postponed visits, the distance masked as busyness, but she remained silent, convincing herself that greatness required sacrifice from both mother and child, never imagining that the daughter she raised with dignity was learning to hide the very hands that built her future. Inside the polished walls of the private hospital, where success was measured by praise and promotions, there worked another woman whose smile never reached her heart, a woman named Gloria, and while she wore the same white coat as her spirit was heavy with bitterness, because no matter how long she had worked or how hard she tried, patients preferred Chama, management praised Chama, and the future seemed to open doors only for Chama. Gloria watched as nurses whispered admiration, As the hospital director mentioned Chama's name with pride, and as wealthy patients requested her specifically, and with every compliment Chama received, something dark tightened inside Gloria's chest. She told herself it was unfair, that she deserved the attention, that luck had favored the wrong person, and slowly jealousy turned into obsession, convincing her that no one so perfect could be real. Gloria began to observe Chama quietly, listening when she spoke on the phone, noticing how she avoided family discussions, how she changed the subject whenever her past was mentioned, and how there was always a tension in her voice when the word mother appeared. Curiosity grew into suspicion, and suspicion into determination, until Gloria decided she would uncover whatever Chama was hiding, believing that exposure would finally level the ground between them. Fate assisted her one afternoon when she visited a friend in an old part of the city. Driving through narrow streets, far removed from luxury, where poverty sat openly without shame. And there she saw an elderly woman seated outside a small house, slicing vegetables slowly with practiced hands. Gloria would have passed by, but something about the wrapper the woman wore caught her. A tensioner blue andilo fabric, with a familiar pattern she had once glimpsed in a photograph hidden inside Chama's office drawer. Her heart raced as she stopped the car, and approaching the woman with fake politeness, she asked simple questions, pretending to be lost, while carefully watching every expression. When Gloria casually mentioned doctors, the woman's face brightened instantly with pride, and she spoke eagerly of her daughter, Dr. Chama, the child she raised through years of market labor, revealing without hesitation how she sold vegetables for decades to pay school fees, how she endured hunger and humiliation with joy, and how she thanked God daily for turning her suffering into blessing. Gloria smiled sweetly, while her mind celebrated, because the truth she had long suspected was now standing clearly before her, unguarded and powerful. She returned to the hospital, pretending nothing had changed, but inside her heart a plan was forming, cold and calculated, because jealousy does not seek justice, it seeks destruction. Gloria knew a simple rumor would not be enough. Chama's reputation was too strong, so she waited patiently for the perfect moment. And it arrived in the form of the hospital's 50th anniversary celebration, an event meant to display excellence, attended by the city's elite, media houses, and influential families. Gloria visited Mama Chama again under the disguise of kindness, telling her lies about an award ceremony prepared in her daughter's honor, urging her to attend as a surprise. Knowing the woman's simplicity would clash violently with the polished world Chama had built, Mama Chama accepted with tears of joy, preparing eagerly, while Gloria walked away with satisfaction burning in her chest, convinced that humiliation would finally restore her wounded pride. Back at the hospital, Gloria watched Chama laugh, plan her future, and dream openly of love and promotion, all while unaware that the truth she had buried was moving closer, step by step, toward the bright lights of exposure. The night of the hospital's golden anniversary arrived, dressed in light, music, and pride, transforming the grand hall into a place of laughter, flashing cameras, and polished smiles, where doctors, politicians, wealthy families, and journalists gathered to celebrate excellence. And Chama stepped inside, believing this night marked the peak of her carefully built life. She looked radiant in her elegant gown, diamonds catching the glow of chandeliers. Her arm linked confidently with Ika's, while whispers of admiration followed her across the room. And for a moment she believed the years of sacrifice, lies, and distance had finally delivered perfection. Across the hall, Gloria watched in silence, her eyes fixed, her heart beating with anticipation rather than joy, because she knew what Chama did, not that the truth was waiting just beyond the entrance doors. Outside, Mama Chama stood nervously, smoothing her faded wrapper, adjusting borrowed shoes that pinched her feet, her heart racing with excitement as she imagined watching her daughter receive an award, unaware that her presence itself would become the centerpiece of the night. When Gloria led her inside, Mama Chema's eyes widened in wonder at the glittering room, the food she had never tasted, the people dressed like royalty. And then she saw her daughter, standing beneath bright lights, laughing, confident, transformed, and pride burst from her chest before fear could stop her voice. "Chama," she called out loudly, her voice cutting through the music like a blade, freezing the hall into stunned silence. Chama turned, and in that instant the world collapsed around her. Her smile vanished, her body stiffened, her breath caught painfully in her throat as she stared at the one truth she had tried to erase. Mama Chama walked forward happily, speaking of awards and pride, stretching her arms for an embrace. But Chama stepped backward, instinctively rejecting the hug, and that single movement pierced deeper than words ever could. Whispers erupted, cameras lifted, and Ika's confusion turned into shock as Mama Chama proudly announced herself, explaining how she sold vegetables for decades so her daughter could study, unknowingly tearing open every lie Chama had told. The hall filled with murmurs as people realized the polished doctor came from a past she had hidden. And when Mama Chama noticed Chama's silence and distance, understanding struck her like sudden thunder. Her voice softened, trembling as she spoke of hunger, sleepless nights, torn clothes, and unwavering love. And with shaking hands, she removed her cherished wrapper, the symbol of her life's labor, and offered it to her daughter, saying quietly that if this was what embarrassed her, she could take it all. Tears rolled down faces across the room, but Chama could no longer stand, collapsing to her knees beneath the weight of shame, regret, and truth, as years of pretending shattered in front of everyone. In that moment, success lost its shine, lies lost their power, and the silence of the hall echoed louder than applause, because the past had not come to destroy Chamadet, had come to demand acknowledgement. For several long seconds after Chama collapsed to her knees, the grand hall remained frozen in heavy silence, as if even the walls were listening. And then, slowly, the sound of quiet sobs spread through the room, not only from Chama, but from many who witnessed the raw truth unfolding before them. Chama lifted her tear-streaked face toward her mother, her expensive makeup ruined, her elegant image shattered. Yet, for the first time in many years, her heart felt painfully honest, and with a trembling voice she confessed everything she had buried, her fear of rejection, her shame of poverty, her lies to colleagues and to the man she loved, each word falling like stones at her own feet. Mama Chama listened without interrupting, her eyes wet but gentle, seeing not the successful doctor before her, but the little girl she once carried on her back through crowded market streets. And when Chama finished, broken and breathless, Mama Chama did what only a true mother could do. She reached down, lifted her daughter from the floor, and pulled her into a tight embrace, whispering forgiveness before an apology was even completed. The crowd gasped softly, moved by a love that refused to be destroyed by pride or betrayal. And in that moment, Chama turned toward them, holding her mother's rough hands high, declaring with a strength born from truth that this woman, this market seller, was the foundation of every success she had ever achieved. She spoke openly of hunger, candlelight study, sacrifices hidden behind smiles, and the dignity of honest labor, transforming whispers of judgment into admiration. While the room responded not with laughter, but with thunderous applause, Ika stepped forward then, his expression serious yet respectful, admitting his disappointment in the lies but expressing deeper respect for the courage it took to confront them publicly. And before the eyes of everyone, he greeted Mama Chama as his own mother, asking for her blessing to marry Chama, proving that character mattered more than background. Across the room, Gloria watched the scene unravel with disbelief, realizing that instead of humiliation, Chama had earned something greater honor and that truth had destroyed jealousy far more effectively than exposure ever could. As emotions settled, the hospital director approached the microphone, acknowledging that while the evening was meant to celebrate medical excellence, it had unexpectedly revealed something even more powerful, the character behind achievement. And he announced not only promotion but the creation of a scholarship in Mama Chama's name for children from poor families dreaming of medicine, ensuring that sacrifice would multiply into opportunity for generations. The hall erupted again, tears flowing freely now, because everyone understood they were witnessing a transformation that money alone could never buy. A reminder that success without gratitude is hollow, and that truth, though painful, carries the power to heal. Mama Chama stood quietly amid the applause, her heart full, her dignity restored, realizing that the love she had poured into her daughter had finally returned, not weakened by success, but strengthened by honesty. In the weeks that followed the unforgettable night at the hospital, Chama's life began to reshape itself, not around fear or pretense, but around truth, humility, and gratitude. Because once the lies fell away, she discovered a freedom she had never known before. She returned to her mother's modest home for the first time in months, sitting beside Mama Chama on the same worn mat where she once studied as a child, listening to stories of the market, laughing at old memories, and realizing that success had never meant leaving this place behind, but carrying it with honor. Chama began visiting every week, not with gifts meant to replace presents, but with time, conversation, and love, proudly introducing her mother to colleagues and friends without hesitation, her voice steady and confident whenever she said, "This is my mother, the woman who sold vegetables so I could become a doctor." When Chama and Ika married 3 months later, the wedding reflected this transformation, not an extravagant display of wealth, but a celebration of unity, roots, and authenticity. Where market women sat beside politicians, neighbors danced alongside doctors, and Mama Chama wore a beautiful African dress sewn by a local tailor, her smile brighter than any jewel. Gloria, meanwhile, could not bear the respect Chama continued to receive, and quietly transferred to another hospital, carrying her bitterness with her, proving that jealousy punishes its owner more than its target. At the hospital, the Mama Chama Scholarship was launched, opening doors for children from poor families who dreamed of becoming doctors, turning one woman's sacrifice into a legacy that would change countless lives. And each time Chama spoke at scholarship events, she stood beside her mother, reminding students that greatness does not begin in comfort but in courage. As years passed, Mama Chama grew older but lighter in spirit, no longer burdened by unspoken pain, knowing her daughter now honored her openly. While Chama learned that humility did not weaken her success, it strengthened it, grounding her achievements in truth. The story of Mama Chama spread beyond Lagos, not as gossip, but as inspiration, teaching people that dignity lives in honest work, that wealth without gratitude is empty, and that the hands that carried us when we were weak deserve reverence, not embarrassment. Chama often reflected on how close she came to losing what mattered most, realizing that love ignored can wound deeper than poverty, and that success that demands denial of one's roots is not success at all. In choosing truth, she reclaimed her identity, her peace, and her family, proving that when we honor where we come from, the future opens wider than we ever imagined.